many people would you be willing to kill in order to save one from COVID? That is essentially the trade-off. That's the kind of question we should have been asking.
As any economist will tell you, with every action, there is a cost. Yet few seem to contemplate that COVID policies could be more deadly than the virus itself, says Gigi Foster, a professor at the University of New South Wales School of Economics and co-author of The Great COVID Panic: What Happened, Why, and What to Do Next.
They have literally outsourced their notion of what is true, what is moral, to a group. And they look to the group to dictate, with every new day, what is today's truth? What is today's moral action?
This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Jan Jekielek. Gigi Foster, such a pleasure to have you on American Thought Leaders.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thanks so much, Jan.
Gigi, as we speak, the World Health Assembly is meeting, and it seems like what we call lockdown policies, various measures, are being kind of implemented into World Health Organization policy, into the international health regulations. It seems like that's what's actually going to happen. I wanted to see if you have any thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very disturbing idea that we would overwrite basically decades of epidemiological knowledge and public health protection wisdom with a justification for what's happened over the last 2 years, with this codification into guidelines that will presumably affect basically countries all over the world. It is something that is not scientific. We don't yet have proof that lockdowns have worked. There still hasn't been that kind of evidence that's been presented that I've seen anywhere in any country, because you basically can't generate that evidence. There is no evidence that these lockdowns are actually a good idea. There is simply this facile notion that keeping people away from each other somehow will slow the spread of viral transmission, and that's a good thing always, right? And that's simply not true, epidemiologically speaking. So I think it will take a while for this to be beaten out of the system, and what is required is for people to speak up and say this wasn't working, and good epidemiologists and caring doctors and people who see what's happening to make petitions. And those petitions are happening all over the world now, to be sent to the World Health Assembly and say, look, this is nonsense. We don't want to sign up to this. And essentially what I think it is a political move, as so much has been in the last couple of years, being basically put in the clothing of a public health move. But it's a political move because it essentially justifies what politicians and health bureaucrats around the world have done to us over the last 2 years. And that's an excuse. It's not actually a proactive health guidance, which is what it's been sold as. So I do expect that as the world wakes up to the tragedy of what's happened over the last 2 years, that sort of initiative will fade away, because the politicians will simply not be able to contend anymore that what they did was a good thing.
There are large swaths of people, of population, even in places which had quite a varied response, let's say like the US, where we had states that locked down extremely hard. You have states that almost did none of that,
Yep.
right? But still there's large swaths of population in the US, and certainly in places like Canada and Australia and New Zealand, where there's still, I think, some level of lockdown. And the population seemed to think that this actually was a good idea.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, in Australia, we had the amazing outcomes that some of the politicians that issued the worst and most ridiculous extreme measures were supported the most. We had a landslide victory for someone in Western Australia who had basically kept that whole state cut off from the rest of the country on the basis of maybe 1 or 2 or 3 cases. It was just fanatically ridiculous. And the people did want very much to have a solution to what they feared, to this threat that they feared, and that's what they were being played on, basically, right? So a lot of the Australian people, as well as a lot of the people of other countries, have simply been had during this period. They have been sold a lie by politicians, again, cloaked in the clothing of public health protection and science, TM. And in fact, what's happened is that the politicians have recognized the opportunity to depict themselves as the savior of the people from this perceived threat, COVID. So the fear that started in 2020, in March 2020, grew and grew and grew and became this force in people's lives to where they kind of forgot about a lot of other things that matter. And they focused on it so much, and they pressured the politicians to save them. And we've just had savior story after savior story. First it was, I'll protect you because you're locked down. And then it was, I'll protect you because I'm going to force you to wear masks. I'm going to protect you because I've got a vaccine. I'm going to protect you because... It's always the same thing, and it's always sold in the language of public health protection. Together with this language of, if you don't follow, watch out because you are going to be labeled an antisocial person. If you love your fellow man, you will do these things because it is about protecting people's lives, right? I mean, how offensive is that? You hijack this wonderful love that we have for each other and use it to support what is basically a political initiative. It's just, ugh, it's one of these things that makes your stomach turn.
I have friends in Canada, in Australia, probably not in New Zealand, but who will tell me, Jan, what are you talking about? This worked. Look how low the virus was in our countries.
Yep.
And look at the mess that happened in the US and other places.
Absolutely. And this is one of those interesting features of the COVID period that you can point to and say, well, look, Australia was lucky. Or you can say, Australia actually got very unlucky. And an island nation like Australia has the capacity to close its borders and seriously decrease the amount of virus that comes in. So does New Zealand. And that's what we did. Once you start on that path as a politician, you're essentially starting on the path of withholding yourself from the rest of the world and letting the rest of the world pay the price of developing herd immunity, doing the technological innovations and whatnot that can help us to fight the virus better, waiting until the less virulent variants arise. You're sort of sitting back. It's called free riding in economics, right? And you're allowing the people to believe that they're protected in this little bubble rather than being part of the rest of humanity. Because eventually, when you open your borders, I mean, COVID going away completely was never on the cards. From at least April and May of 2020, we knew there were huge animal reservoirs. We knew that this was just something that was going to be with us forever. So zero COVID was a nonsense. So you knew you had to open the borders at some stage. And the longer you can delay that, the more you can continue to paint yourself in the short run as a politician as the savior. Look, we have low counts. And of course, you don't have to kill your economy as much, although in Australia we had very, very severe lockdowns, including in Melbourne, which I think was about the most locked down city in the world during the COVID period. But you can say, oh, well, we didn't have as many economic effects and the virus didn't take as many people, and therefore I'm doing a great job. Now, this is the classic confusion of correlation and causation. So yes, it's true that at the same time that we were having the lockdowns and doing the border closures in Australia, we also had reasonably low, compared to the rest of the world, effects in terms of COVID deaths and even infections, and also we had a reasonably good economic performance for a couple of years. But that doesn't mean that the things we did were what caused those results necessarily to, in the long run, be something we'd be proud of. What we basically did was delay the wave of deaths that we could have had and gotten over with in 2020, and we kind of, because of our putting ourselves in our bubble, we're able to not seem as though we were having any serious economic effects for a couple of years. And now we're going right back into the same kind of economic distress that the rest of the world is now experiencing. So we had a couple of years of la, 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 right? Of just pretending that this was, we were going to somehow be magically immune from both the viral effects and the economic effects. But now it's coming. If you look right now at infections and deaths in Australia, and even at the economic indicators like inflation, it does not look good at all. And that's what we're in for, unfortunately.